All right, so nutrition. To me, this developmental orthopedic disease is the biggest problem facing the horse industry. Maybe that's because I'm so sensitive to it. Is it reproductive physiology? No. I mean, if I don't get a mare bred, I don't have to pay the damn stud fee. So, you know, my vet is plenty efficient. Is it communicable disease? Probably not. You know, you hate when you have a herpes outbreak or something at the racetrack, that all the trauma that it causes. But, you know, I think people do a pretty good job with biosecurity and keeping their horses vaccinated, and disease per se is typically not a big problem. It can be an outbreak. But osteochondrosis, or developmental orthopedic disease, is a big problem because you have yearlings that are worth $800,000, and you do the x-ray and it looks like a grenade went off in his stifle and he's worth $100,000 or nothing. You know, so it has a huge impact on us as breeders, the radiographs that they look at. And with digital films, I think that the impact is even greater. And with the CYE mentality of a lot of people in the process that are not willing to understand that just because there's a radiographic anomaly doesn't mean that it has any impact whatsoever on potential performance, then all of these radiographic problems that we have in our radiographic changes that we have in horses are a big deal financially. And it's not necessarily a totally fixable situation. You know, if somebody tells you that they're gonna eliminate OCD or DOD in your herd with feed, you need to run the other way just as fast as you can, because it ain't gonna happen. All right, it's not gonna happen. So DOD, and again, it's developmental orthopedic disease. Developmental orthopedic disease. I remember one year in Ireland, we had a farm with 100 weanlings, and we did x-rays in November. We did x-rays again in April, and we did x-rays again in September. And these are all breed to race. I was just curious. The first set of x-rays done as weanlings, I looked at them and the results, and I thought, I'm fired. All right, this is catastrophic, absolutely catastrophic. The ones that were done in March on the same group of horses, I thought, you know, maybe I get a salary cut, but I'm not fired. And then by the time we got to September and did before they went to the racetrack, we ended up doing 2 surgeries on horses. All right, so a lot of these things they grow out of. Some of the bad lesions they don't, but they can. But it includes osteochondrosis, which is a failure of endochondral ossification in the bone that may progress into osteochondritis dissecans, where you have a flap of cartilage, and you may have joint mice, you know, where you have to go in arthroscopically and clean this lesion up. Subchondral cystic lesions, so there's a cyst usually in the ankle or the stifle that is a failure of ossification. So they have retained cartilage and you have a cyst. Fasciitis used to be referred to as epiphysitis is part of this, and it's an inflammation at the growth plate of the long bones. We see it predominantly probably in the distal metacarpal or the distal third metatarsal or tarsal bone. The one that bothers us the most is these. It looks like a hen egg on the inside of the ankles of the foal. They get with heat they get painful, or where they get carpus varus, where they have a big inflammation at the medial distal radius of the knees, are where we usually, and wobbler syndrome. All right, those would be probably the most common types of DOD. Causes. This is why it's not fixable. It's multifactorial. There's no doubt that there's a huge genetic component here. You know, there are mares that routinely produce numbers of horses that are outside the norm in terms of one lesion or another. This is particularly true for cervical vertebral malformation or wobbler syndrome. So genetics is a big thing. And, you know, when I was at the university, we were still kind of like breeding garden peas and learning about genetics. And genetics has come like light years. And we've already sequenced the equine genome. We have certain diseases that we have found specific genes or gene pairs that are responsible for these problems. And I think with a lot of these things that have a genetic component, we're going to be able to identify eventually where that genetic thing is and whether or not we can manage that gene a different way to prevent expression of the problem. Trauma. There are a lot of people, a lot of smart people that actually believe that much of the OCD that we see is actually due to joint trauma. That actually it causes a decrease in the blood supply to the cartilage and the subchondral bone and results in a defect. So trauma is certainly trauma in wobbler syndrome can be something that causes the horse to become unstable in his spine, in his cervical spine, and become a wobbler. Confinement is a big one. If you want to precipitate OCD, lock them up. If you want to precipitate OCD, you lock it up. Bone is an organ, and bone increases in density and in growth in response to loading. So if you put a horse in a stall, if you lock them up, for some reason having nothing to do with bone, fractured ribs at birth, the mare colicked, so the foal's up, he's got rhodococcus, he's temperature or light susceptible or unable to regulate body temperature, he's locked up. Anything having nothing to do with bone, then you increase that horse's probability of having a bone lesion, simply because you're not loading the bone. I had one client that said, you know, these early ankle OCDs are killing me. I've got to be able to do something about it. And I said, well, you know, from a nutrition standpoint, we're in the sweet spot. I know we're not looking at a deficiency. I don't think we're looking at an imbalance. But I said, the thing you got to watch is confinement of these foals. And he said, well, that's not it. You know, we've got to look at something else. But he called his secretary in and said, go get the health records on those 6 foals that had early ankle OCDs. He went and got those health records, and 6 out of 6 had been locked up for a 2 to 3 week period as a foal because of something having nothing to do with bone. All right? And then you try to transition those horses from confinement to turnout. And how many of you have had them so you've put them in a small round pen, you've gone to a small paddock, then you've gone to the pasture and you go back there and they've got effusion in their ankles. It's very difficult to manage that post-confinement transition of the bone so that it's the same as it would have been had they been on normal turnout. So it's very important to understand that when you change their routine and when you lock them up, that you're going to change bone metabolism. And at this area, at this time, that's a very difficult thing. So my theory is the subchondral bone, the bone beneath the cartilage, is of a different density, a different composition than that had been laid down before. And so consequently, when you put them back out and they try to load this bone, the bone collapses rather than supporting the cartilage, and you may have a lesion that occurs. So it takes an act of Congress for me to lock one up. You know, if I can possibly prevent it, if they say lock them up 10 days, I say, can we make it 5? If they say 5, can we make it not at all? Because I hate to lock one up because of the impact that it has on a very immature skeleton. You can get it because of opposing limb lameness. Let's say that a colt or foal gets a P3 fracture on his right leg and he's lame, then he's going to overload the left front, which may result in a lesion. So any of these anomalies can cause a change. Conformation. Is it a chicken and or the egg deal? Where do you see the most fasciitis on the ankle of a horse? Guesstimate? I see the most when we have toe-in conformation. And not only is it the most, but it is the most crucial in terms of development of the forelimb. You know, if you think about it, if you get some inflammation on the lateral side of the ankle, typically those horses are going to be fine. They might be a little bit valgus in their ankles, and they're going to be fine. They typically load the foot about regularly. But if you get a horse that looks like this, they're going to load the lateral heel, aren't they? The outside heel. And this inflammatory response that you get to the side is going to be exacerbated. All right, I think that means made worse. So conformation is a biggie for me. And when do you get fillies especially that want to try to go carpus varus on you, go wide in their knees? Most generally, it's fillies that we've had on a 2-week trim or some kind of remedial application for toe-in conformation, that they want to go varus in their knees. So conformation, I think, is a big piece of it. I know that when we put a transfascial screw in the outside of a horse that wants to toe in and got significant fasciitis, when we get the fasciitis kind of regulated, that they become more comfortable and they're more correct and less inclined to have a problem. All right, and we use a screw that goes in the growth plate. Typically, in Kentucky, that's the only thing that's used anymore. We used to do periosteal elevations. Have you ever seen a PE, a periosteal elevation? It was like a vaccination. You know, half the horses in a herd were getting PEs. And the reason that they did is because it didn't hurt anything other than if they died waking up from anesthesia. Didn't help anything, but it's fairly innocuous. But with transfascial screws, you actually can affect permanently the angle of that bone. But conformation is a huge one. And nutrition. And nutrition can range from mineral imbalances, mineral deficiencies, excessive feeding of energy, excessive growth rates. There are a lot of manifestations, but if you have the nutrition what you think is perfect, there's still an opportunity to have DOD. And that's why I think it's a really bad problem that we have. When we look at foals, I'm not a big aggressive creep feeder. You know, I think that a normal milking mare produces enough milk to meet that foal's nutrient requirements up to about 3 months of age, easily. So if a foal wants to eat with his mother, I don't prevent it from doing that. I mean, I got clients that hang their feed tubs 6 feet in the ground. You know, the damn mare has to get on tiptoes to get in it, much less the foal, because they're convinced that they don't want this foal to have a bite of feed. It's toxic. I don't agree with that. If a foal wants to eat with their mothers, when the mare's getting fed, I let them do it. And I can guarantee you that my mares, anyway, are going to assure that that foal doesn't overeat. So, you think about how much they're able to steal, it can't have a great big impact. What I like for them to do is to learn to eat. Because when they get to be about 4 months of age, a month before 3.5 to 4, depending on condition, I'll start trying to get them to eat some feed on their own. And the reason I do that is because when I wean them, I don't want them to go into a significant slump in growth rate. Because sooner or later, after they experience this significant growth slump after weaning, they're going to decide that I might live after all. And then we're going to have a growth spurt. So the growth spurt is really the thing that's probably more problematic than the little bit of a depression. So I try to get them to where they're eating, and I'd like for them to be, when they're eating, when they're weaned at 5 months of age, to be eating 3 to 4 pounds of feed per day, plus pasture. And then after they're weaned, I'll probably bump them up to about 6. But this foal's getting significant nutrition from this mare through her udder. They're going to start processing a little forage. They're going to steal a little feed. And I think that most mares are capable of normal growth rates in the foal in terms of their milk production. Now, how do you tell if they're not? I have the master fattens ox. If this foal is not got some fat down his top and has not got some fat deposited milk fat, I call it, and they're steep in their withers and they're narrow in the crest of their neck and they're light made, they're a little bit ribby, maybe a little potty, then this mare is just simply not getting the job done. And then you've got to take over that. All right, you've got to make sure that you get supplemental feed into the foal. You have other foals that look like the butterball turkey. And you know that this mare is overproducing or producing an abundant amount of milk. In that case, I may wean these foals at 3 to 4 months of age if there is a structural issue that warrants it. So if I'm getting a foal that I think is too heavy, it's got fasciitis, or if they're going bandy in their knees, or if I can't keep the toe-end conformation controlled, then I'll go ahead and wean this foal early at 3 months of age. We did a group of foals at a farm, it's been 1990, we had a problem with wobblers before, and so we wanted to look at early weaning of foals as it impacts on wobblers, cervical vertebral malformation. So we weaned everything at 3 months. And they looked a little bit like Biafrans for a while. They were pot-bellied, looked like that condition, kwashiorkor or something. And the owner wasn't very impressed with our decisions. Out of that group of horses, we had 5 individual group winners. 60 days after they were weaned and looked so bad, they look like normal foals. So they do get a little pot-bellied. They do look like they feel sorry for themselves. But you can wean them at 3 months and control growth rate because you have some control of caloric intake, of energy intake. If you got a big, heavy milking mare, there's no way you can control the caloric intake of the foal. That mare, if I take her off of feed, she's still going to produce a lot of milk until she milks all the fat off her back. So the only way I have to control growth rate or intake of the foal is to wean it. Weanlings, our first goal is to replace milk nutrients. Again, how much milk has that mare been making? 3.5%, 2.5% of her body weight in late lactation. So if I wean that foal and just chunk it out on a pasture and say he'll be okay, I'm not going to get the kind of response that I want. All right, so I want to replace milk nutrients. I want to prevent the post-weaning slump that we've talked about, where they quit, followed by a big increase in growth. Monitor the condition and bone of these horses in terms of the conformation or indicators of DOD. Monitor growth rate if you can. If you're serious about thoroughbred horses, I think it's a good investment to buy a scale. They've got these little platform scales that you can put in the back of your pickup and haul from barn to barn if you want to, and it just gives you so much information that is not a guesstimate. You know, it's a concrete, palpable number that you can use and compare to a data set to see if they're doing right. When we look at weanlings, I would say that for 90% of weanlings, that if you're between 3 and 4 kilos of feed, 6.6 to 8.8 pounds of feed per day, you're in a sweet spot. And if you prefer for your weanlings to be a little lighter, 3 kilos is going to meet the requirement. It's just not going to put quite as much bloom. If you prefer for them to be a little heavier than the 4 kilos. But it's very rare that you see a weanling where you need to feed more than 4 kilos of feed, 8.8 pounds. And particularly if you're thinking about selling as a weanling, you know. And I don't like to feed a lot more than that to a sales weanlings because they can go pretty erect pretty fast. So, January 1, these weanlings turn into yearlings, right? What if they're May foal? Are they yearlings? Jockey Club says so. But are they yearlings? No, they're really weanlings still. So there's really no distinct chronological change going from weanlings to yearlings. Because January foals are going to be about a year old January, but May foals are going to be significantly less than that. So it's just a trajectory. You reassess the contribution of forage when the grass comes on or in the springtime. You assess your marketing endpoint. And what do I mean by marketing endpoint? Are you a breed to race? Are you a July Fasig-Tipton sale in Kentucky? Are you August New York bred at Saratoga? Are you Keeneland September? Are you Mid-Atlantic yearling in October? Are you October in Kentucky? You know, where is your marketing endpoint? What are you trying to do here? And you have to be very, very honest with yourself when you do that. It takes a different set of rules for you to get it right. If you're breeding a race and you're not going to send them off until September, October, November of their yearling year, you can be a lot more conservative in terms of growth rate than if you're trying to make a living with selling the foal. You know, the fact of the matter is, fat's a pretty color. I don't make the market. You don't make the market. The people paying the bills make the market. And there is a certain window that these horses have to fit in terms of growth and development and maturity and condition and mass and volume for them to want to look at them. And so you can either accept that and prepare horses that meet with their expectations, or you can be happy about bringing them up here and RNAing them and taking them home. Or bending over and taking less money than they really are worth. All right? That's the reality of the thing. And I would say in general, in the past more than now, when New York breds came to Kentucky, they were just too backward. They had not gotten enough to eat. They were not progressive enough. And that's changed. And I don't know if it's a change in what they're worth up here, or a change in the mentality, or a change in the quality of stallions, but I see a progressive increase in the way horses are prepared up here compared to the way it used to be. But you can't get them ready to go to a horse sale if you don't feed them. It's just impossible. And you can say, well, the horses in the wild didn't get all these feed. I haven't seen a wild horse race in many a moon. We're talking about a different creature now. So, go into the sales, looking at what's bringing money, looking at their condition, understanding the amount of feed and exercise that they're getting is very important. So if you look at Central Kentucky, we would have ranges from, in the springtime, a kilo of a balancer pellet to up to 5 kilos, or 10 pounds, 4.5 kilos of feed for these yearlings. And then in June, when we start prepping them, then we're going to accelerate that a little bit. All right? So, usually when we go, a horse sale is a horse show. Do you agree or disagree? It's a horse show. And 90% of those things that we take up there, regardless of which sale we're going to, are going to be worth more on that day than they'll ever be worth again in their lives. That's just the reality to it. And fat's a pretty color. Fat and slick is a pretty color. People can't stand, they can't say no to a pretty horse. This mare Stellar that I was talking about, she's a gorgeous mare. She's a Grand Slam mare. All of her foals are drop dead gorgeous, and none of them can outrun me. But we continually take them up there and get $80,000 to $150,000, and she's 20 years old. And she still can't produce a runner. But people can't walk away from a pretty horse, can they? This is a Group 2 winner. She's a stakes winner from a great family. She's a half to Giggy Star. The one she's carrying, she's got to be going to produce a good horse. This is it, if she's pretty. On the other hand, if they're mud ugly, they're not going to take a chance. Or if they're ribby and raw and potty and not prepared right, you're going to get penalized at the horse sale. So we use a lot of fat-added diets in that time. We'll feed these things like 10% fat feeds. We use beet pulp. We put them on a horse walker, or we hand walk them, or we lunge them, or we drive them, get them fit, or swim them. There's been a big increase in the use of swimming pools in prepping these yearlings because it tends to tighten them up in their abdominal muscles. You get these things that you just can't seem to get the belly off of them, and you put them in a pool, and it seems like it tightens them up there. The other thing I'll say, and I'll quit, about prepping these yearlings, you've got to be accurate about assessment of fat. And a heavy-mettled horse is usually not a fat horse. It's a horse that doesn't have enough cover down their top, and it gives you the appearance of having a heavy middle, because horses don't put on fat in their belly. They put fat down their top, over the crest of their neck, behind their shoulder, up over the tail head and the rump, but not here. They're not like humans that have a beer belly and that you can get them off that way. So many times people want to feed them less if they're heavy middled, and actually the trick is to feed them more, to put more top on them, to put more fat cover. So make sure you assess the difference between fat and condition and heavy middle. And then likewise, the other side of the spectrum that people make a mistake is that they call a really heavy muscled horse fat because they have a round muscle pattern. The genetics are such that they have a big gaskin and a big forearm and a big hip and shoulder, and they say, this horse is fat, but he's not fat. He's heavy muscled. So assess condition, fat cover, and understand that you've got to feed these son of guns. And if you're going to make a mistake going to the sale, it's better to err on the fat side than on the thin side. So because it truly is it's a horse show, regardless of where the sale is. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there and answer any questions if y'all want to ask them. Yeah.
I think for about half a dozen of my paddocks, like the waters are fed by well. It's got sulfur in the water. Mm-hmm. Any kind of, does that interfere with any of the other mineral intakes? Anything I need to be looking at, with respect to how we treat those horses?
Probably not. The question was that he has paddocks, well, you've probably heard it, that have sulfur in the water. I had a good friend of mine, Steve Johnson, not Jackson, but Johnson, which is Margot's stud. He managed a part of Spendthrift, asked me the same question last year because he had sulfur water. And he felt like that since he moved to that farm that he had a lower incidence of OCD than he had before. Is there a reason that sulfur could help me with my OCD? I'm reaching here. But sulfur is one of the elements that is responsible for what we call a sulfhydryl bond, which is a change in the cartilage that gives it its density, where you have wound protein. So a lot of people believe in feeding MSM, which is methylsulfonyl methane, and basically MSM is a good source of elemental sulfur. We haven't looked specifically very hard at sulfur in terms of the requirement. We have some kind of penny ante requirements, but we haven't really looked at it. So rather than saying that you would have a situation where it was interfering with mineral absorption or interfering with the absorption of another mineral, I would say that maybe the sulfur could be, as long as it's not a rotten egg, high sulfur well, could be an advantage rather than a disadvantage because of the impact of sulfur on cartilage metabolism.
Is low selenium, it's a big problem in the cattle. Mm-hmm. And on the cattle side, we've been told that, that the sulfur in the water can even exacerbate, or maybe it's in competition, or, I guess they're both cations, right, or whatever, but so that was the reason for my question. So,
and it depends on the animal. For instance, copper. In Ireland, for a long time, they've had copper was a big problem in cattle, copper deficiency. And they have high molybdenum levels. And the molybdenum interfered with copper absorption. But what they did was they gave cattle supplements, or they gave them copper injections, because this hypermolybdenosis, they called them turt scours or peat scours, because of the copper should have been okay, but the molybdenum was so high that it interfered with copper absorption. But the problem with that in bovines, in ruminants, is that there are complexes of molybdenum and copper that occur in the rumen that make the copper unavailable. In horses, it's never been shown that the molybdenum interferes with copper absorption, so it's a different kind of a breed of cat, because the bacteria are in the hindgut of the horse rather than the foregut of a cow. So for different species, you may have differences. And it's really easy on most feeds to get a feed that's up to around 0.5 to 0.6 parts per million selenium that's going to cover all the bases for you anyway, if you're feeding any grain.
First of all, just on the say the average broodmare feed, there's a lot of price differences between feed. I mean, you can buy a bag of feed for $12 or you can buy a bag of feed for $20. I mean, the ingredients are basically the same. The feed companies say they have premium ingredients, etc. How big of a difference is the price of the feed make?
Yeah, there can be. The question was, I mean, this guy grew up the same place I did and went to the same school, and he's like me. He's he's so cheap he squeaks when he walks, and I know we share a common heritage somewhere. So, is that premium of $4 a bag of feed worth it? Sometimes not. You can do it a lot more inexpensively than we do it. All right, because again, it goes back to equi-analytical. If it says horse, then it's 100% markup. And where they're using the same oats and corn to make the cow feed, and the same trace minerals, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when you put the picture of the pony on the front of it, it significantly increases value. So what you have to do is enough sleuthing in looking at feed tag, and different states have different feed tag laws. In Kentucky, it's protein, fat, fiber, min-max, calcium, phosphorus, vitamin A, selenium are the requirements, and it's minimums for phosphorus and so on. So you can do some sleuthing there pretty easy and look at the differences numerically. And if you can get a trace mineral profile, you can probably get there. And it's the same thing. I got 22 ravenously hungry horses at home, and they seem to think that they want to eat twice a day, and they prefer the best hay. And unless you're a sheik, and I'm not, you don't want to be throwing away money. So I'm careful about what I feed, and I don't overfeed, and I don't believe a lot of the stuff about prebiotics and probiotics and yeast and all of these premium ingredients. And I think I do a very good job. And even for, my clients like Lane's Inn and Pin Oak and Three Chimneys, I feel like I have somewhat of a fiduciary responsibility to them to get them a feed that is going to perform the best that you can, but at a price that makes sense. Just because they have expensive horses doesn't mean they have to be raped. So it just takes sometimes it's hard to answer. Sometimes there is, sometimes it isn't. But if you, by law, every state is a little bit different, but by law they have feed tag laws. And you can even look at it visually a lot of times, or from a palatability standpoint. But if I was looking, if those are real numbers, 8 versus 12, I would have to look pretty damn closely at the 8 and see, if I could discern what the deal was. And the other thing is spend $38. Take a sample of it, send it to Dairy One. You get an analysis pretty dang fast. You'll get a DE value, you'll get mineral values, you'll get ADF, NDF. You'll be able to tell at least if it's what it's supposed to be. So I don't think you have to spend a lot of money. Some people want to spend a lot of money. And that's their prerogative. It's the same with all the powdered bat wings and foo-foo dust that you see on the shelf at the tack store. I'm just not into it. I don't take supplements, and I don't feed supplements because all of my feeds are probably over fortified to begin with. And if you look at the stacking effect, like if you look nutrient by nutrient and look at intake from your forage, from your feed, and then from the supplements that they want to feed, you get up to where you're feeding 300 and 400% of the requirement for some of these minerals, which is not very smart. It's not good nutrition anyway, to me. And my trainer, I formulated a diet for him and told him kind of where he ought to be in terms of how much he feeds. And I told him, I said, you don't need to feed any supplements. He's like, I usually feed a supplement. I said, that's fine. I said, I'm not going to run your business for you. But on my horses, if you feed a supplement, I'm not going to pay for them. So it needs to kind of come out of your 10% if maybe you win a damn race for me. So don't put it on the board bill. And you know what? In the 12 years I've had horses with him, I've never gotten a bill for a supplement. And I don't think he's feeding one because he's cheap too. So if you're feeding, what I'm saying, if you're feeding a really good feed, what is it that makes you think that you're going to improve things by overdoing nutrients? And the reason we do it is because most of us as horsemen want to think that we're doing the absolute best thing that we can to make this horse successful and healthy and run fast. And so if some snake oil salesman comes through with something that's going to make him run faster and jump higher, then we are easily prey, usually. So I just, for instance, there's a product called Race 13. I don't know what, it now is the biggest selling feed on the racetrack. And other than for salt, there is no way in hell that you should have to add anything to this feed from the standpoint of vitamins or trace minerals or whatever. It's complete. If you feed it with good hay, and actually a variation in good hay, it meets all the requirements. But people just can't stand not meddling with it, of a little snake oil and a little powdered bat wings and so on. So, and it goes back to the same question on the 8 to 10. You said you had 2, didn't you?
The other question, totally different, and it's just on the yearling prep, there's the amino acids or the amino acid supplements or the top dressing with the big time high amino acid things, and they're saying it builds top line muscle. I mean, is that a little bit of snake oil too?
Yes. Easy question. Yes. The only thing that I do in that respect a little bit when prepping horses is I might use rice bran oil.
That was my next thing.
Right.
A little bit of the gamma rosinol.
And here's my deal. So there's this product out there called Bodybuilder. I'm sure you've probably seen it. And basically the dosage of Bodybuilder is 10 milliliters, cc's, a day of the Bodybuilder. And that is to provide the gamma rosinol. In human studies, there's a mixed bag of results. Like one study says that if you take the gamma rosinol, you get an increase in power on a bicycle ergometer, and one says that you don't. So anyway, this Bodybuilder is kind of a long-time product, and at that point, everybody's trying to move a B plus yearling to a A minus, or a B to a B plus, or a C like mine to a B minus, and so they're looking for magic. Okay, so my deal was the source of Bodybuilder is rice bran. Okay. And the source of rice bran oil is rice bran. I've always said that there's a variation in the response to some of these plant sterols, like gamma rosinol. I know that fat is effective. I know that rice bran has high levels of vitamin E and 36% fat, and the rice bran oil is 100% fat. So if I give a horse 3 ounces of rice bran oil, I give him 1,500 milligrams of gamma rosinol. The dose that they want to give you of Bodybuilder is 1,000 milligrams of gamma rosinol. So if I feed 3 ounces of rice bran oil, I get what I know is a superior energy source and a very good source of omega-3 fatty acids, and the gamma rosinol gets thrown in for the bargain. All right, so I prefer to approach it that way because I know I'm getting some benefit from the oil, and the omega-3 fatty acids. And I still don't know if I'm getting a anabolic effect from the plant sterol in the bodybuilder. So again, that's the way I approach it. It's a little bit of a trade-off. And the only time I really use a lot of rice bran oil is during the prep phase. And I think if you do a good job growing a horse, you ought to be able to prep any horse in 120 days without blowing him apart. You know, like if you've done due diligence all along and raised him right, then if you got 120 days to prep him, and some of them in 90 days will prep. You know, it depends if they're really good horses. Doesn't take long to get them ready. But if they're backwards and you're playing catch up, it may be less probable.
In central New York, most of the hay producers have gone to raising reed canary grass because of the tonnage. And at a certain point, it becomes unpalatable. And what is height the best indicator? And then also another question along with that, is testing positive for alkaloids or something like that? Is that?
And, you know, I haven't fed a lot of reed canary grass. I've fed a lot of orchard grass. And orchard grass is a little bit the same way, is that once you reach a certain maturity of that plant, I think the palatability goes down significantly. And I haven't been able to show that it's an alkaloid or a mold or whatever it is that's causing it. But I suspect that maturity of the plant is the biggie. But if they're doing it because of tonnage, then they're wanting to get it mature anyway. It's the same with Timothy. You know, Timothy can be a decent plant. But when you go and you see this real reedy, stemmy kind of Timothy with the seed head on it as big as my little finger, then you know, basically I could predict chemically what that stuff was. So we don't do much reed canary grass down south. But I see a similar thing with orchard grass on very mature orchard grass, and I don't know really what it is that's causing it. So,
would you elaborate a bit on your use of beet pulp in the prep phase? Mm-hmm. Under what conditions would you want to use it, and how?
The good question. All of my prep diets, I have like Prep 14, all of the diets that I use for sales prep diets, and most race diets. Like if you look at Race 13, or if you look at Race Ready, which is a Purina product, and in most of the race diets are now fat added with some beet pulp in them. So I did it a long time ago. I was using some beet pulp soaked or loose with prepping some yearlings with a client of mine, Craig Banderoff. And we were using this beet pulp, and the feed company liked what they saw and so on. So they took the percentages that we were using in this prep deal, and then we came up with a Prep 14, and that's where it came from. So I would use in a prep diet, I would use as much as 20% beet pulp. And then I would use also like 15, 18% molasses, because the beet pulp soaks up the molasses. And if you don't use that much, it gets a little dry. And then I might use 8 to 10% fat. Prep 14 actually is 10% fat and 20% beet pulp. Used to, like, I don't want a bunch of different feeds at my house. So if I'm prepping a horse, I use the same texture, just a straight 13% protein textured feed. And I soak some beet pulp and put it in there as a succulent, because I do think it's palatable. Do you have to soak it? No, because we've done all of these rations for racehorses, but the beet pulp soaks up the molasses, so it's not going to expand in their stomach and blow up their stomach and all the old wives' tales. But I I never wanted to blow a horse's stomach up, so I always, if I'm just going to feed it straight, I soak it just because caution, and because I think it's a succulent. Like if you get a horse that he kind of gets tired of eating, and you give him a little soaked beet pulp and it's something novel, he'll eat it. And so and I use it throughout the prep phase. And I think we started using it a long, long time ago in show cattle when we're trying to put some top and middle to show cattle. And then it just made sense if you're getting where you're feeding too damn much feed anyway, and you want to moderate energy source because you don't want to overfeed starch. Really, the only three ways you can do that is that you can feed better hay, more immature, better, more energy-dense hay. You can feed more fat, which is 2.25 times as high in energy as starch. You can feed super fiber, which is beet pulp or alfalfa meal, to reduce starch intake. Those are the options you have. So if I'm feeding a horse a lot of feed, which a racehorse gets, which a prep horse, some of those horses are getting up 18 pounds of feed per day, 3 feeds. So I'll use that as a alternative energy source other than starch to reduce the possibility that I'm going to get a lot of carbohydrate into the hindgut that's going to make this horse have a bellyache, basically. And how many yearlings get a bellyache? How many yearlings founder? It's very, very rare, isn't it? It's very rare. So it's like I tell people, if you'll do it right coming up to like April or May of a horse's yearling year, you can pour the cold to them after that and have minimal negative responses. All right? So you don't have to have them looking like a show horse all along. You can grow them normally, and then once that grass hits and in the summertime you've decided that this is going to be a Saratoga Select horse or it's going to be a Keeneland horse, and you can back calculate day-wise, then you can get after it and put some condition. And some of those horses during the prep phase are gaining 2 pounds a day of body weight. So you figure 30 days, that's 60 pounds. Well, 60 pounds makes a pretty significant difference on the frame. So you can turn them inside out during that phase that you're prepping for the horse sale. One last comment. To me, flexibility and no rules should be the order of the day. If you decide, like I decide, that you want to raise horses outside, if it's going to be just a blizzard and you don't want to get out into it and you got a foot of snow, put them in the damn barn. And then the next night, turn them out. There's always got to be flexibility in this deal of where you don't have hard, fast rules about how much you feed, about what you feed, about when they're in the barn, when they're out of the barn. All of it's got to be flexible based on environmental conditions. And I've had people tell me, look, Doc, I don't understand. Said, I've been feeding these weanlings 7 pounds of feed when they're weaned since I went to work here 10 years ago, and I've never had a group of weanlings look so bad. I said, okay. I said, is there anything different that you can think of this year? Yeah, we haven't had any damn rain in like 3 months. It's really dry. And I said, so is there any reason that 7 pounds of feed shouldn't work like it has for these past few years? Yeah, because there's no damn pasture. So you've got to always respond to differences in the environment and differences in the individual. Horses are like people, There's some of them that are air ferns, get fat on asphalt and water, and there's some of them that you got to feed them pretty hard. And I think that horses are really that way, or hard keepers, or have a different metabolic rate. So know that there aren't any hard, fast rules other than that there aren't any hard, fast rules. So I enjoyed it. I I know I'm long-winded. I mean, it's a genetic trait of Texans. But I really enjoyed it, and thanks for having me up here.
Absolutely.